Beyond 5 o'clock, so we want to start the session on diabetic retinopathy. We know it's the last session of the day, so thank you very much for coming. First of all, I would like to invite the panelists, Dr. Tariq Aziz, Dr. Shakib Anwar, please come on the stage. What we have done is Dr. Raja is going to present some of, slightly, cases that are different to normal what we see. We expect a lot of interaction, and if time permits, I'll present a couple of cases as well. Okay, so we expect participation from the participants. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I think we'll start the graveyard session. So there's a social evening as well. Thank you, Dr. Rahman Siddiqui, for that, and thank you to the Federal OSP for the lovely hospitality and the invitation. I'm Mohammad Raja. I work as a consultant ophthalmologist at James Paget Hospital, that's in East Anglia, Norfolk. Apart from my work as a clinician, I do some other bits as well. I have a subspecialist interest in medical retina ophthalmic imaging. I'm also the clinical lead for my hospital with 11 consultants, and the clinical lead for East Anglia Diabetic Eye Screening Program. I'm a training program director for medical retina module.
Raja? Sorry, आपकी आवाज़ सही नहीं आ रही, एक तो थोड़ा सा माइक करीब कर लें.
Is it better now?
That's better.
Thank
and
you.
I think if I see Dr. Shahid Jamal, please come on the stage. I also see Dr. Tariq Khan. I think he just yet please come to the stage. Sanaullah, Dr. Sanaullah, I don't see him.
Are we good to go? Yeah, lovely, thank you. So I work I do quite a bit of work for Royal Colleges for their examination and the consultant CSER portfolio as well. Please we'll try to make it an interactive session. So you just show you slightly different kind of imaging you might not have seen before in the routine clinics, and some of the variants of diabetic presentations that you might come across. This is where I work. It's a beautiful beach. For the next 4 or 5 months, it's absolutely a lovely place to work, and it's about 5 minutes from my office. So it's nice in summers only, though. In winters, it's not a nice place, and all the blue is the North Sea over there. Thank you for the hospitality to the OSP. Disclosures, I have received travel grants off and on from some of these big pharmas, and I've got some research grants from Canon, which is coming up as well. Just the take-home message for this is they try to understand the value of the multimodality imaging. This is a word you will hear again and again now. When you're using 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 10 different imaging modalities, depending on what you have got, the kit you've got, then you have to use that. Addressing medical respective control, important. We know that. We don't sort of as open thing, and just always keep an open mind for black swans. And the reason probably is that mostly swans are white, but you can have black swans as well. So we'll start with our first case. I've got a series of cases. If we finish early, then Dr. Siddiqui is kindly going to chip in as well, and we'll see how the interaction goes there. So very standard sort of a diabetic presentation, type 1 diabetic for 42 years, no vision issues. Saw his own optician for a routine checkup, and they picked up a pigmented lesion in the left eye. Anterior segment, generally I don't bother too much. Pressure was normal. This is a 7th standard field imaging of an Optos photograph. It's like a clover leaf cut out there, and right eye looks good. The left eye, anyone wants to chip in, feel free. There are no right or wrong answers, so you can do. I'm sorry? Yeah, absolutely looks like a small choroidal nevus, nothing to worry about in the macular area there. Just try to show whether we can get it there. That's where it is. So OCT, and this is from Spectralis system. And I think there's nothing much to write about here. And so what do you think we should do for this patient? Yeah, very good. We can keep say 3 months, 6 months, once a year. Yeah, I think that's, do you want to do anything else here with the information you've got? Yeah, very good. So, I mean, this looks like a small nevus. So you wouldn't be too worried about this. Probably I'm going to discharge him because, I know I can send him back to the diabetic screening service, but yeah, you're right about that. So, and so this is a 7th standard field, which has been a part of all the diabetic trials that we have been reading since I was born into ophthalmology for the last 30 years. And if you get a wide field image on the same patient, do you pick up anything different now? Remember, this is an asymptomatic patient, very good vision, no issues. I'm sorry? Right, okay. So what do you think is the grade of retinopathy here? And I'll show you the other eye as well so we can keep this moving. You want the mic there?
Are you asking about the diabetic retinopathy stages?
Do you think it's diabetic?
No, absolutely not. Because I could see some occlusion of the vessels in the temporal side, inferior temporal.
Do we get occlusion of vessels in diabetes?
No.
We can.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah. But there's not much retinopathy anywhere else there, right? Right, so just to give you an idea about the difference between these ultra wide fields. So this is a nice sort of a picture to take if you're interested in that. Just in one picture, you can understand that what's the difference between a 30 degrees versus the ultra wide field. The ultra wide field Optos does about 200 degree, which is about 84% of the retina in one go. And next, what we did was fluorescein angiography. Any comments now? Fluorescein angiography? Anyone? I'm sorry? Yeah, there's a lot of vascular dropouts, but now you see the diabetic retinopathy changes appearing as well. You can see these dots here and there, and you can see the whole bit there's nothing much there. So there is significant peripheral non-perfusion there in the left eye, and the same thing as you go wider in this eye as well. So remembering that this patient hasn't got any obvious proliferative changes, no rubiosis, is asymptomatic and just picked up incidentally that there are so many changes that you can pick up. So just the point here is to show you the difference between a 7th standard field versus an ultra wide field imaging. That's one point. And the other thing is you can always carefully look at the peripheral retina in every single diabetic. Absolutely mandatory, and also in uveitis. Just make these two rules, and I think you will sort of save a lot of litigation if you're working in European countries or UK. So this patient has now got significant peripheral non-perfusion. You have done that, but there's no obvious PDR, there's no significant macular edema, there's no rubiosis. What further management should we do? Yeah, very good. So, but the Optos is very clear. There's no anterior segment, posterior segment inflammation. There, you have seen the fluorescein angiography there. It doesn't look like uveitic there. There isn't any significant sort of uveitic features.
So probably FEVR we should look for.
I'm sorry?
FEVR.
FEVR, you can think of that, and that's a reasonable thing. But the classical features of FEVR or Kreswik-Schappan syndrome is you get lots of blood vessels. Lots and lots of blood vessels. They start from the periphery and go to the posterior pole. That's a classical feature of that. I've got about 3 or 4 patients with FEVR in my clinic for the last 10, 15 years, but this is not typical for FEVR. So obviously you have to investigate for vasculitis or posterior uveitis. Even if there's no inflammation, you must rule that out. That's important because some of the things can be life-threatening as well. So this is always worry about the macula. So this is a OCT angiography. The macular scan on a spectralis system looks pretty good. It's got a bit of a mild fovea plana, which is incidental, which you can see quite commonly in there. And this is the left eye now, looks pretty good. And that's why he's got very good vision. And just to show you an idea about the macular non-perfusion, when you read these papers, these beautiful images that you see in AJO or ophthalmology or any of the retina papers, you won't get this level of clarity in your clinics, even if you've got the best instrument generally, because a lot of post-processing is done while these images are being made. So you have to remember that while reading the papers. So you can see that there This is a 3 or 4 years old paper, and everything in blue is not good. And you can see as the diabetes, the severity of the retinopathy progresses, the blue areas are sort of a more and more indicating macular ischemia. So macular ischemia, you must sort of look for that, and OCT angiography is a good sort of a surrogate marker. One thing further you can do.
Sorry, Raja. Just asking, how many of you actually regularly use OCT angiography in clinic for diabetic retinopathy? So does every patient get it, or you select the patients who get it? Okay.
Selective.
आगे पास करें.
Waqar bhai, is it only on a private patient or on every patient? Excellent, very, very good.
No, we select the patient, the one who needs.
So another thing that we can do, which is sort of coming out in the last few years, is what we call as the wide field OCT angiography. So without the putting in the dye, you can get some information to the same patient. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures now on how the patient is going to look on that. So this is from the Zefilio system, and this is the right eye. This is a standard image, about sort of a 16 by 18 millimeters, wide field dye-less angiography. And you can see the superimposed OCT scan quite wide, goes quite wide over there. And then you see the left eye looks pretty good actually. There isn't much in there. But as you try to move the camera around and try to look at the periphery of this patient, you'll start picking up the areas of non-perfusion, even on dye-less angiography as well, which you will see on the next slide there. Probably these areas there. So this is all noise. This is not, and this is all dye-less sort of areas of non-perfusion. This is OCT angiography, wide field OCT angiography, and same for the right eye as well. You can see those areas of peripheral non-perfusion that you could see a lot more clearly. But the thing is, the Zefilio doesn't go as far as the Optos, ultra-wide field fluorescein angiography, so that's a limitation. I think there's a Chinese company who are sort of in the process for making another wide field, but I think it's not available at least in UK. And I think Interlight is another from, I think, US manufacturer. I think it's not available as yet in UK. So you have done all of this fancy imaging with a lot of very expensive instrumentation, but what should we do with the patient now? Rahman, what do you think we should do with the patient? You've got significant non-perfusion, there's no posterior uveitis, there's no vasculitis, vision is excellent, there's no macular ischemia. Apart from the choroidal nevus and non-perfusion, we haven't got much to worry about here. What else should we do?
So I think the peripheral non-perfusion has to be treated because there will be consequences. And I think most of the panelists, would agree that this patient would require targeted PRP. I would like to know that who would consider doing a generalized PRP in this patient. Would you consider that?
The capillary non-perfusion was in the peripheral area, so that area must be ablated first in the form of PRP pattern, and then wait and see what is happening in the rest of the areas.
Right, I think the panelists are moving towards a PRP. Anybody would not do a PRP? From the audience, be brave, raise your hand. And you might be right as well. Excellent. So why would you not do a PRP?
If it increases, then certainly you should go for peripheral PRP. Now, for the general ophthalmologist, I see so many cases where they've lasered within or around the arcades. Now, that's viable tissue and we need that field. What we need to do is reach out towards the periphery, the far periphery.
Yeah, I think that's another option as well, and let's see what happens with this case now.
One of the bigger considerations in our setup would be how prudent would this patient be with follow-up.
Absolutely,
So if
that's a
he's-
vital point.
Yeah, so if he's somebody
everywhere.
who lives nearby, he's educated, and if you can, literally talk some sense into him and he can understand what he's looking at. So I usually tell to the patient at this point that, listen, aapki aankh ab zyada mohalat nahi degi, and it's at higher risk for developing complications. But I generally find my patients, they even all said and done, they're hesitant to start treatment at a point where they're enjoying good vision. And there are times that you, as an ophthalmologist, when you know the impending risks, you push the patient. But at this point, in this patient, I would not push him too far to get himself treated straight away, especially if he can follow up with me on regular basis.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think you can take it either way. Let's see what happens with this.
When was this, this OCT or angio was done? Was it the first time or they was done before some months
I
back
think-
or?
Ji Shukeba, you're jumping the gun. Let's show you the couple more slides now. You will have your answer now.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to ask the patient about the lifestyle. It's really important. He lives out, he said, I live out in the sticks, which means he lives out in the woods. We've got a large geographic area. He's a carer for his wife who's got advanced dementia, so he's absolutely dependent on driving. Now, one of the criteria for the DVLAs in UK is that apart from the central vision, if the visual fields are constricted and you do a very aggressive PRP, they can lose their driving license. That was important to that gentleman. And Shukeba, the next slide that you will see, this is on a Heidelberg system, and this is nearly 10 years back. So this was done in, this is my patient, we did that in 2015, and this was the Optos done again at the same time. So we have just followed this patient up every 6 months or so, and we have not done any PRP. And the first slides you see were actually a few weeks back, right? So you can monitor the patients.
Yeah, you can wait then. If you don't have any new vessels coming within 3 months or 4 months or 5, then you can wait because the pattern is like that.
Yeah, I think the key bit to look for is if you got rubeosis, if you got NVD, or if you got macular ischemia. I think these patients are going to go. And obviously what Hina mentioned is that if you are reasonably sure that the patient is going to come back to you and attend, you can sort of monitor the patients as well. So I thought this case was interesting to share.
Raja, sorry, I have a question here. Raman.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry. So just trying to understand, I think this is a very good case that you've highlighted, that you have a 10-year follow-up. And, I think most of us, if we have seen the 2015 scan, would probably be convinced that this patient, in the best of his interest, would require a PRP. Now, my question to you is that if we laser that sectoral area, do you think his peripheral vision, the driving vision, would be affected? Because it seems quite far away. And for me, I would think that, if you do this laser and this is done and dusted, then he's probably going to be okay. And, even if he misses his follow-up for his health reason or some other problems, I would not be really concerned.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. One point is that I was quite sure this patient will attend. That's number one. Number two is I wanted to prepare this case for this conference from about 10 years back. That's why I wanted to show you this. And the third thing is, even with the peripheral targeted laser, you're right about that, they can get epiretinal membrane as well. You have to remember that. So you have to think of the whole process with that patient and their lifestyle and think what is the best option. This patient chose that option, and I was happy to go along with that. But majority of the patients, if I have any sort of a doubt that which are my more typical patient in Yarmouth, I'm going to offer them PRP, right? And if we've got the chance to use off-license Avastin as well, if they got rubeosis, or so that sort of causes very quick regression of any new vessel. But this was an odd case in the sense that there wasn't anything else apart from this sort of almost like vasculitic picture of this peripheral non-closure. And I've seen this quite a few cases with COVID now. Whether the COVID was always around back in 2015, who knows, so whether he had some peripheral vasculopathy and occlusion because of that is difficult to say that. There's a fair point on that. So likely not, but I may not always do the PRP myself. My fellows might do it, and there's somebody who wants to take their boxy, they might end up doing a very aggressive PRP. So, it can always work like that. So, yeah, great. So the learning points from here is that one size doesn't fit all. You have to really talk to the patient. You really have to make a decision with them. It's their eye, and you have to sort of respect that. Use ultra-wide field imaging if available, and sort of tailor it for your patient. How you can get the best outcome and best information to make a decision. And I think it's an exciting new thing to use, the wide field OCT angiography. These machines are expensive. They are still in evolution. It's difficult to say which one is going to end up being the best one because there are about 4 or 5 now systems available. But Zefilio is the current commercially available one, which gives you the widest field of OCT angiography, at least in UK. But as I said, there are a couple more systems available which can give probably a bit wider. So we'll move on to our second case now, I think. So patient really relocated from London to our area. She's a type 2 diabetic for about 14 years. The optician referred that she's probably the patient has had a previous laser, so can you please have a look at her? And the patient doesn't think she's had laser at any time. And I was a fellow then, and I was a fellow for 50 years. So when you're a fellow for 50 years, you know everything, right? So my trainee, one of our trainees brought this case to me to show me the quick OCT and wanted to discharge the patient. Right, anybody wants to have a go at this one? Do you think it's normal or abnormal? Yeah, you like saying it ISOS, but ellipsoid
Please
zone,
use the
whichever,
mic.
doesn't really, doesn't really matter, doesn't matter. So there are 4 different nomenclatures. For the outer retinal bands, there are 4 different nomenclatures. The one proposed by the international group, which sort of uses ellipsoid zone or EZ. It is also by, I think what's his name, Ravi Jonal's group in California. They use a different system. They like ISOS. Then I think there is Don Miller, who uses another different system. And there is a chap in Poland who uses another system. So when I asked them, does it really matter? He said, yes, it does. But they got the big labs, and they do these papers every year, like 10 papers out of it, so.
Epiretinal membrane over there as well, I think.
Epiretinal membrane, Rahman is the expert on that. Have you got significant
Over there,
epiretinal membrane?
No.
I think Dr. Hina has some comments.
Well,
I think that hyperreflectivity is only because it probably is the right eye. So you've got a thicker NFL towards the nasal side, exactly. So patchy degeneration of the ellipsoid zone along with some thinning of the the outer nuclear layer. That chap in Portland is probably Brandon Lujan, the one you're talking about. The chap in Portland, Brandon, ki agar aap baat kare, he's talking about directional OCTs from UHSU. His terminology is about his work on directional OCT says that if you were to change the direction of incident light beam on this, then the ellipsoid zone can actually be seen to recover. So sometimes it's an artifact to have, but let's see how the case moves on.
Yeah, I think directional, my understanding is that the outer nuclear layer is the one that you can really get. The plexiform layers and the onal layers, ONLs, you can get, and you can do that. You can ask the patient to look here and there, and you can get that. So ellipsoid zone up, my practice, I don't think I've noticed much different, but it might be. So this is the run through of the other eye. This is what the fundus looks like. Just go back there and just you can see the OC. This is not running the Tanveer bhai.
I bet Rahman would love to see an AF on this one, right?
The video would run through here. So just a quick run of the video of the left eye, so you will see what this is. Lovely. And you can stop in the middle bit there, then, yeah, it's all right, go ahead.
Show me the AF.
Huh?
Show me the autofluorescence.
And, this is the color fundus photograph.
So show me the autofluorescence for this patient. It's AF.
You're again jumping the gun, you're too eager, So this is the color fundus photograph of the left eye. Remember, the patient is asymptomatic, and this one as well now. Anybody wants to hazard a guess now? You can do extra 10 phaco's next week, whichever unit you are, So the information is there for the diagnosis. If you are an expert reader in OCT, the information is there. And with the color picture, is dead easy now. And we are moving on to Rahman. This is the fundus autofluorescence there. Right? And so you got the OCT, you got the color fundus photograph, you got the fundus autofluorescence in a diabetic lady. And the patient then tells you further, let's make it a bit easier now. The patient now tells you that I don't have any hearing assessment. The husband says she does have. So we have got a bit of fight in the clinics, and I send them to audiology to formally document that. And she comes back as has a 70% hearing loss. Anyone? Afzal? Afzal Khan? Afzal Khan was my SHO in PIMS. So I'm going to pick on you now. I'm sorry? Excellent. So they come to train kiya. So you can see that pakadi asne dystrophy. Well done. So we referred him for genetics to Addenbrooks. And this is a very clear-cut case of 3243. I was so confident even from a single OCT, I could write that this is likely to be a mitochondrial retinopathy, a 3243 mutation. and this is what they picked up. They do send you back it after 9 months when you've forgotten everything about the patient, but this is how sort of, so this is a case of early mid-related macular dystrophy, which is maternally inherited diabetes and deafness. So very, very typical case of that. With the 3 or 4 different modality of images, you can easily make out the diagnosis. So Rahman bhai, aapke liye tha ye ki medical retina people have some uses, right? Okay. Right, so we'll move on to our next case, which is that medical risk factor control does matter, right? Yeah, हर patient को बताते हैं कि यार, it's very important, do this and do that, and they really get sick of that because type 1 diabetics are very difficult to deal with in UK. They're going to 15 different clinics. They've got 20 appointments in a year. They are young, they're socially active, and their social life is all destroyed by sitting for 4 hours in your eye clinic, and then tell them, how is your glycemic control? And they really get upset at you, and they then don't attend, right? So, referred from the diabetic eye screening program with the possible R2 is moderately to severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. M1 is for maculopathy present. R0 is R2 and M0 is when there is no maculopathy based on the color from this photograph. These are the screening program criteria. Possibly there was a mention there might be a vein occlusion. She wasn't having a good time. She had delivered a baby 2 or 3 months earlier, and she had went into a DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis episode, a few weeks back before presenting to the eye clinic. Right, who's the diabetes specialist here? You seem to know all the answers, you know. Do you want to have a go? There are very obvious features in there, so I think it's pretty... mic on, Karlin, please.
So hemorrhages, definitely.
Yeah, go on, speak. There's hemorrhages. What else there? What about this? Pre-retinal? Likely. Okay, let's have a look at the next one.
The intraretinal hemorrhages, like the deeper one, more ischemic looking appearance might be.
Yeah, hemorrhages. Let's we are settled for that. Right.
Settled.
Right. Just show you this. I think इसका video check कीजिएगा तभी भाई कहने चलता है या नहीं. So that's all right. Okay, don't worry about it. Don't worry. So this is the fluorescein angiography early frame, and then as you move on, start to notice the changes here. Right. So when you look at the fundus photograph or clinically, it doesn't always give you the correct picture as well. So that's why you've got these different tools available at hand to use them. And look at the other eye as well. So lots of changes there. So what do you think is the diagnosis now? She's a 41-year-old Chinese female. She's a diabetic for 5 years. Recently had quite bad glycemic control. Obviously was into DKA, had postpartum, and probably during pregnancy the sugar controls would be sky high as well. So you're committing to proliferative diabetic retinopathy, yes?
No, I think these are quite a lot of amount of aneurysm might be, because I couldn't find any specific vascular pathology like neovascularization, but these are leaking points definitely. So please.
जी पैनल लिया आपके लिए 1 करोड़ का सवाल है ये.
Pre-retinal bleed, that has to have a source. The pre-retinal bleed, it has to have a source. I mean, it can't come from the microaneurysm, so there has to be new vessels somewhere. और मुझे उसके बिल्कुल पीछे वो fluffy hyperfluorescent वो fluff नजर आ रहा है उसकी.
You have to look at everything is lighting up a lot as well, so that's unusual, but that can happen with ischemia as well. So every time a blood vessel goes through a patch of ischemia, it's going to light up, you know, that happens with new vessels or without new vessels as well. So, right, we'll move on with that, and this is the other eye, and just to show you a comparison of that. So it doesn't look like a very healthy looking eye. So what we did with her was, and these are the OCT scans, we hardly show any, they're pretty good OCT scans. So what should we do here? You finally get your wish for PRP now, Rahman.
No, I think I would like all the panelists to answer this. What would they do individually? So Dr. Tariq Khan. Okay. Mike, kiske paas?
Systemic evaluation is more important in this case. Systemic control of diabetes, renal function test, serum lipid profile, hypertension. You control that and observe. That I'll do.
So you,
Right, so the first panelist thinks systemic risk factor control and observe, and let's see what happens. So anyone else wants to?
Along with, of course, diabetes, because during pregnancy there may be a rise. And second, control of blood pressure, if she has developed blood pressure.
Relevant, yeah,
That
okay.
is sometime.
Anything for the local side of things? So we have talked about the systemic side of things. Anything for the local? Do you think treatment needed? Anti-VEGF should we do, or laser?
No,
should we?
I don't think not at this stage. She should be observed like this because there is hemorrhage, but you can't see. Ji? Huh. You can't see the source of hemorrhage or neovascularization as such, even on angiography. But there are hemorrhages which are lying in front, but they are not typical hemorrhages. They have a different shape. So I think to observe and to control the systemic markers, I think should be the first choice, and then see what happens next.
Rahman, what do you
well,
do?
I think,
Shikar, there is a leakage there as well, so you have to cover the leakage as well. For that, I think there is a role of anti-VEGF in this case.
I think as long as she's not anemic, and blood pressure is controlled, I think if we all agree that this is a proliferative diabetic retinopathy, anti-VEGF has a role here. I mean, if we don't agree that this is proliferative diabetic retinopathy, then that's something different. But there is a pre-retinal hemorrhage, and that automatically, if you do grading of diabetic retinopathy in NHS or anywhere else, it just puts you right straight in the proliferative diabetic retinopathy group. And then based on that, you decide how do you want to treat this particular patient. I totally agree, but the last thing I want, for me, if my fellow sees this case, he has to treat this patient. He's not going home unless this patient is treated, because I do not want her to return to the eye clinic tomorrow or that week with a vitreous hemorrhage. The eye is going to bleed. The eye is already, the pre-retinal hemorrhage is from the bleeding. Yes, I mean, I would not consider doing a PRP here, because I think if you look at the macula, it's looking a bit sick to me. And if we do a PRP, this is just going to develop macular edema and things. So my thing would be, I would consider,
A great discussion, and I think it's always nice to have entirely opposite polar views, which is very nice for medical retina, because that really spices everything up. And let's see what we did. And I was a genuine budding consultant at that time when I saw this case, Tariq Bhai, as you mentioned yesterday, I'm a budding ophthalmologist or something. So, and just for the people who are taking their fellowship exam, especially for the UK, you must know about the evidence base. For the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, the top two studies are the old ones, and Protocol S and Clarity study deal with the proliferative diabetic retinopathy side of things. So these questions are always going to be asked in your vivas and for your MCQs as well. And once you pass your FCPS exam, just burn your Kansky and go to journals and learn from your patients. So this is what we did for this patient. So we did quite nice sort of PRP, and you can say everything is nice and extensive PRP. I was very concerned. She's a very sick lady. She has had a lot of problems over the last 12 months or so. And now with that sort of thing in the left eye, I don't do a full session in one, I don't do a full PRP in one session, which is a pattern spot laser that I've got, but do it in two sessions. Somehow we ended up, because it was a pre-retinal hemorrhage, we ended up doing the left eye first over 2 sessions. And what happened afterwards was quite surprising, because this is the other eye. It absolutely regressed without any treatment.
So, you can imagine giving anti-VEGF and the other eye having some effect from but you cannot come to
Exactly.
a scientific thing that,
Yeah.
treating one eye PRP will result.
And the reason she cured herself is because after the first 2 laser session, I think I did the first one, where I blamed my fellow for the second one. She was so appalled with the treatment that she didn't come for a few months. And once her metabolic, as Dr. Saab said, metabolic things were controlled, the left eye got a lot better. I haven't seen this level of improvement in most eyes, actually. It's a very rare thing to see this level of improvement. But her overall things, her hemoglobin A1C was flying through the roof, and blood pressure and everything else was quite bad. I think her renal status was pretty much okay, but she did quite well. She's still coming she still has a follow-up at about 10 years with me. And this is the baseline. Yes, Anna.
I'm very impressed with the way she has regressed, but I would like to mention, especially for the junior ophthalmologist, that this is an exception rather than the rule. So it is a rare thing to happen, and and you made that point about me disagreeing with you always on the MRAP form, but I agree with you. I would have done a PRP on this case anyways.
So I think it's very important. If you're absolutely sure you're going to have a follow-up with the patient, then you must do a PRP. As Rahman said, this patient, I would always choose a PRP if I've got an eye like that. I mean, so what, at least you've got the macula to live with, so rather than that.
Get to this normal level, because once the vessels are damaged, they never come back to their original state. Without, even that,
Afzal bhai,
without
iska common answer ye hai कि yes, you're right, but rarities are always there. That's why I put about black swan in the front. ये case conference के लिए इसीलिए select किया, just to show you कि odd things happen, and you should keep your mind open. So it's really a combination of helping the eyes as well as the systemic control. Is both things go hand in hand to
Raja, can I confirm that this, Rahman here again, so can I confirm that this patient's hemoglobin was normal? Because, I see some rot spots in the previous picture, so I'm just wondering whether that, and, I think she was
I think
postpartum.
I think if she's persistently anemic, then the right eye wouldn't be this sort of a good. She would have, typically with anemia, you can get different sort of hemorrhages. Especially look at the periphery. If you got an optos, they got these tiny little things as well. That they
Are
can,
there any Are there any contraindications for treating the left eye with anti-VEGF? Not doing the laser or doing an anti-VEGF. Are there any contraindications for that? If you want to follow that protocol.
Anti-VEGF, she was quite unwell lady coming out of a DKA. She had pregnancy and the child wasn't, I didn't mention that, but she had a very bad glycemic control during her pregnancy. And so there's a lot of things, and she's a Chinese origin. She doesn't speak, her English is probably as good as mine. So she doesn't speak too well. So there are lots of other factors in this. You have to consider the patient holistically. This patient, if you look at the OCT there isn't any macular edema there. What are you trying to treat? There is no rubeosis.
So my problem with protocol S is, when do you stop? मतलब आप PTR के लिए protocol S employ करके anti-VEGF तो देना शुरू कर देंगे, but when do you stop? Would you follow up with the?
There could be an argument. For argument's sake, giving her a field effect for that matter, these scars are going to expand with time. I think it's in our body. So if there is no contraindication, asking because they didn't know the full history. If there are no contraindications, you can follow that protocol for PDR, giving anti-VEGF.
That's a good thought. If the patient was paying me privately, I would probably do that, and she could afford that. The thing is that NHS NICE UK doesn't improve that. We do have the luxury of using off-label Avastin, as I mentioned earlier, for rubeosis and NVDs, but not much else. We can use it for that, but not. PRP is the standard treatment, so I have to have a medical legal defense as well from my peers that I'm doing the right thing. But you're right about that. You can use regular anti-VEGF. You have to, though, as Hina was mentioning, if the patient DNAs, they come back with a vengeance. Remember that. Once you stop these anti-VEGF on these, I've done that with PDRs and we have lost patient, they come back with a vengeance. I don't know whether the eye gets primed up for some reason, but when they rebound very badly. So if you're starting somebody on anti-VEGF without doing a PRP, you have to make sure that you have follow-up is there on the dot, or you sort of track them very closely, because the moment you're going to lose them for 3 to 6 months, they come back very badly. This is my experience so far.
Raja, I have a comment to make, please. Rahman here again, sorry.
Yeah.
It's always on your right
Sorry.
side. So the question that you asked, whether some of the changes in diabetic retinopathy reversed. So basically the trials that were done for anti-VEGF for PDR have actually shown reduction in the level of the diabetic retinopathy scales. Now, obviously, if you have new vessels and everything, they're not just going to disappear. But the levels of diabetic retinopathy, because you do PRP, the level of diabetic retinopathy grading doesn't reduce. You're actually treating the disease.
So
but with the anti-VEGF, there has been...
Yeah, I think the anti-VEGF, you're right about that. Some of the microvasculopathy changes do regress, like hemorrhages and microaneurysms can regress, but the non-perfusion does not. none of the studies so far has actually shown convincingly that the non-perfusion is going to get better. If you're interested in sort of a more of an ultra-wide field imaging, protocol AA, drcr.net is a good study to look up, because they use ultra-wide field imaging and fluorescein angiography for that, and to go through the leakage bits of that. But I can't remember any study that has convincingly shown that the non-perfusion reverses, but the retinopathy they look better. When you give them regular anti-VEGF, they do look better. She was a diabetic, I think, for about 5 years, type 2.
No, I mean,
but she was
diabetic
referred
retinopathy.
after a DKA, an episode from the emergency physicians, because she had not had any eye appointments.
So there is a possibility that this might not be a diabetic retinopathy at all.
Yeah, absolutely. अफजल भाई
If,
सब
it
कुछ सब
has
कुछ हो
reg-
सकता है दुनिया में.
I mean, she could be having anything else, but regressing to that much normal level, it's
Yeah, that's unusual. That's unusual.
that's
लेकिन
very
ये मेरे
unusual
पास
for
इसका
diabetic retinopathy.
10 साल का follow-up है अब जो है ना. So she has started to develop a bit of a change in the other eye, but she's not good now. So it's an interesting case. I thought I'll share this. I'll try to move on now. So there is something as spontaneous regression of retinopathy, but don't hedge your bets on that. So if you're in doubt, just treat with PRP or anti-VEGF, but follow them closely and see what you wish to do. So we'll probably move on to our next case now. A 48-year-old female, type 2 diabetic for 11 years, and again referred from the diabetic eye screening program, 6/6 vision, anterior segment. As a proud medical retina specialist, don't bother to examine it too often, and this is what the Optos looks like. So I think we're losing time here, so we'll probably just kick on. I'll just show you something.
Raja, I think, Professor Shahid, what do you think is happening?
Only there is a pale optic disc I can see on the fundus photograph, but I cannot appreciate any new vessels over here or any other vascular finding. The vessels are dilated inferior to the optic disc, and reflex in the fovea is there, and in the periphery I think either they are artifacts or what is the...
Right,
So,
okay. I think
fine.
there are fair points there, but I think the optic disc pallor is purely because of the pseudo color of the Optos. If you do Optos, you get this funny sort of thing. Optos have now recently upgraded their software to include the sort of a RGB as part of their thing. So now the colors would look more natural to you when you would see them. You can see a bit of a green there, and this is not a proper SLO camera. This is almost like a low quality SLO camera compared to a Heidelberg system. So it's where you focus, you get different levels of focus. And that's why you get different levels of color. The other thing is that obviously the retina is really curved like that, and what you're seeing is a flat picture. And this is one of the problems with Optos, has always been how to address that. And that's why you get these different colors there. But I think that their newer software is a lot better, but it's quite expensive, so we can't keep changing the cameras. I'll probably move on with that and see. The OCT scan, well, a bit of a hard exudate there. The other eye looks pretty decent, I would say. So mild DMO. What should we do next? Observe 6 months.
Use the mic, please.
Micro at the back.
I don't know if it's just me being blind, or because I see that there's a lot of hemorrhages in the superior hemimacula than the inferior one. So that asymmetry is more like a hemiretinal vein occlusion, and you just skimmed through the right OCT scan that showed more cysts in the superior peripheral macula, and the fovea was spared and the inferior retina was spared. So I'd be thinking about superior hemiretinal vein occlusion, impending-ish on one side, and focal macular edema, center sparing superiorly on the right.
Let's see what happens with this, right? Get some. So this is probably a good slide to remember from your exam point of view, especially for Royal Colleges. Medical management, this is the list you have to blurt out. All of this, and you say all of these things are important. I think the important bit is not the glycemic control here, but the glycemic variability. If the patients are going up and down, that's again not a very good thing. So the time in range, where they stay pretty stable, is important as well. Just as visual acuity 7.5 is a good thing, the hemoglobin A1C within a variable, non-variable range is a good thing as well. Tanveer bhai, ye aapke acha chal raha hai. So just a quick, so again, a landmark study. So you need to know that again for the exam. I just put it for the fellows, when we teach them. And if you've got interest in diabetes, do look up these Scandinavian data. They do very nice studies, like longitudinal 25, 30-year studies, which are observational studies. So you can get interesting information from them. So this is 2 years after the baseline pictures. So she is getting worse now. If it were vein occlusion, you would expect probably a bit worsening quicker. But the patient is vision is pretty good, and she doesn't have any problems. And this is the other eye. Yeah, you're right about that. There's predominance of changes in the top half there. But, and so the situation with us was now that both the retinopathy and macular edema were much worse, but she was less than nice criteria for anti-VEGF treatment, and the patient is asymptomatic as well, so it's not just justified to do anti-VEGF with this patient. So she was quite concerned that my diabetic control has been so good and all the medications have been stopped for 12 months now. So what are you talking about this whole diabetic control sort of things? And she's actually under investigation for postural hypotension, so blood pressure is not an issue. And she's actually got Addison's disease. So it's a part of the autoimmune spectrum, whether she was actually a type 1 and not diagnosed properly, so we don't know. So for the management here, there's a quick one. I think we're running out of time, so let's try to get to the next case because that's probably the best case of the series. We move on there. So just remember, learning point is, diabetic control might improve, but the retinopathy might get worse. It's a long-term known thing. It's a legacy thing. We all know that from our textbooks. But always check for rubeosis. I mean, my patients always get dilated. They get imaging, but make it a habit now. I tell my fellows to always sort of look for rubeosis, even through a dilated pupil. So if probably show you this imaging that you may or may not have done yourselves. So we did iris angiography on this patient. I'm not sure. So you put in a dilating drop at this stage and just ask the photographer to run your images. So this is on a spectralis system. And you're getting these nice areas that are, at this point, difficult to say whether they are Cobb stuffs. But Cobb stuff clinically look a bit different, and you have to see them undilated, right? And this is as you move through the sequence, you start picking up these changes there. So this is iris angiography, fluorescein angiography. And you start getting leaks as well during the later phases there. And by the time about 5 minutes are there, you can start getting information. Even through an undilated pupil, a good technician can give you reasonable images of the back of the eye. And you can start appreciating that how the vessels are quite leaky based on fluorescein angiography there. As you go into the late phase, as you take them towards the late phase, towards 20 minutes, you can see a lot of leakage there. Right, so points to reflect on this is, really, so everything is important. Diabetic control does matter, but you have to keep following them up. You don't let go of them. And if you're not treating them, then obviously you need to see them regularly. And look for rubeosis, high beam, high magnification, short slit, go 360 degree, takes 3 seconds to do in one eye and 3 seconds other eye. You must make it a habit. I tell my fellows, they haven't done that, they don't get any cases on their cataract list. So that's as simple as that. So for 2 weeks, they don't get any cataract surgery. And use tailored imaging. Signpost your technicians. If you got a good technician, imaging technician, that's a blessing. Because your images are only as good as your technicians, so they are the ones. So this is probably the good case to look into, and you can obviously see this is something wrong from the picture there. So 68-year-old male, type 2 diabetic for 15 years. He had improving glycemic control. He was a fisherman, very active. Blood pressure, no issues, non-smoker, fit and well, always goes into the North Sea for whatever he wanted to do. Good vision, no concerns. Anybody, quick diagnosis, the top 2 differentials here. This is the right eye, 7.5 vision. Obvious findings. It's got hard exudates there, and we got a few hemorrhages there. Probably vein occlusion versus diabetic macular edema. So I would say, which way it's going to go, like an infotemporal branch vein or something like that. Other eye doesn't look too bad, but has got a patch of this sort of a few hard exudates there. So OCT. So all the action is happening in the inferior half, and the other eye looks pretty good. So question is this center involving diabetic macular edema? So the modern terminology with OCT is a center involving or non-center involving, and you'll read that in the newer guidelines from whatever you want to follow. And FFA will take you there. So if you've got a non-center involving DMO, you have the option of laser, especially if you've got cercinates, then you can sort of do that. And we'll take you through the angiogram. So you start seeing the microaneurysms a lot better. They're always the case. There are always a lot more microaneurysm on fluorescein angiography compared to clinical examination, compared to clinical photography, and compared to OCT angiography. Fluorescein has got a value. So early and late. Left eye. So focal grid laser was carried out. This case was back in about 10 years back now. And after the laser, he got much worse, of course. And 6 months post-laser, he was actually just sort of not happy now. The vision had dropped to about 612. So ranibizumab became available. Lucentis became available at the time. It was a great drug at the time, and everybody loved it and said, let's hit him with Lucentis because there's so much edema. And somebody might take us to Florida on a trip as well, so that was great. And so key anti-VEGF trials, probably skip that. And the reason we use 400 microns is based on the subgroup analysis of the RESTORE study and the protocol I, which was used by the NICE UK to make the evidence guideline for that. We are not allowed to treat under 400 as part of the NHS. And this is different to all the other major guidelines. So UK is the only odd anomaly in that. We have got ways around it, but I'm not going to tell you that. Not on an international conference. So after focal grid laser and 7 monthly Lucentis injection on the dot, this is what the patient looks like, much worse. This is the right eye, and this is the other eye. Any thoughts now?
How old was the patient?
I'm sorry?
How old was the patient?
Respectable age, 60s.
I would check for protein electrophoresis.
Yeah, very good. So we go for that. But why would you do that? What's the sign in there?
Sorry, say that again?
What's the sign in there? Is there I'll show you that. Why do you think serum protein electrophoresis is relevant in this case?
Because of the type of edema that I'm seeing. Doesn't look, diabetic.
Yeah. That's a very good thought. So the type of edema, you must sort of look out for that. So Rahman passes his fellowship exams there. So well done, Rahman. You did well. So when the DMO doesn't respond as you think it should, what are the reasons for that? So it could be that the responder pattern for DMO is an odd pattern. Complete failures with anti-VEGF, in my experience, is very unusual. Partial responders are there, but complete failures, unusual. Injection frequency may be inadequate. You might not be injecting them when they need that. There could be macular ischemia, peripheral ischemia. Does the pattern fit in, as Rahman correctly pointed out, with the natural history of the condition? Whether there's been a quick rate of glycemic control. If you improve them quickly, they get worse. This is a common thing, it's a well-known thing as well. Renal status, Dr. mentioned, that's very important. If you've got a lot of subretinal fluid, that's another cause of a lot of that worsening changes that can happen very quickly. We can use radiomics AI data. I'm doing some work on that, but it's not relevant right now. And always remember there are other conditions as well, because the eyes are part of the body. So here's your field now, Rahman. You said high serum protein electrophoresis. You got those two images there, and you got the diagnosis there. How can you justify your diagnosis on this fluorescein angiography?
Well, I can. I'm just wondering if anybody else has spotted it.
Remember
what's the difference here? This is the early frame. It's 4-minute frame here. What should you be seeing that is not visible here?
Leakage.
What about FAV? Well, okay, but you saw the OCT. Do you remember the OCT? What did the OCT show?
The patulite appearance that classically should be there if it's macular edema of cystoid nature.
So where is the macular edema here?
Yeah, if you see there were lots of subretinal fluid on the OCT scan, a classical diabetic, you'll expect patelloid edema. That's the classical hallmark of that. If you read the studies from the last 40 years, you know, they always show that. And this is the other eye showing something very similar. So there's something odd happening here with the pattern of the edema there that's not typical for diabetes. And you have done lots of anti-VEGF in the right eye. It's not responding. And in fact, the other eye is much worse now. So there's something bilateral, right? So we investigated him for this, and this is what is called as angiographically silent macular edema. And this is very classical for hyperviscosity syndrome, as serum protein necrophysis, as Rahman pointed out. So this is a case of paraproteinemic maculopathy in a diabetic, which you will easily miss if you don't sort of take sort of account of the different imaging modalities there. So we investigated him, and he's got immunoglobulin G, IgG myeloma, and this paraproteinemic maculopathy. When they're given the diagnosis, typically the oncologists tell them it's about 2 years. The mortality is pretty sort of a swift, and they get lots of problems, bones and everywhere. And the key point really is there's no egos in our profession, right? Just remember that. If your diagnosis is not correct, not fitting in, go back, revise your diagnosis, think this, you're missing something out there. So 4 conditions that you're part of the hyperviscosity syndrome. So the patient actually failed 6 lines of chemotherapy for IgG, 6 lines of chemotherapy. That's very unusual for somebody to actually live that long, to fail all of these therapies. I sent him to Addenbrooke's Cambridge for plasmapheresis for non-responsive macular edema. He went there once and didn't want to see them again. He also obviously failed anti-VEGF. I switched him to Eylea as well, as something might work, and it did not. So then we had Ozurdex implant became available. So after the first Ozurdex implant, this is how he looked like. It was a brilliant response in terms of what you see, and I think his vision became better as well. And one thing he said, you know, I don't mind going 6 feet under, but as long as I can keep my vision and I can keep driving and all of those things, that's really important for me. So further over the next 6 years actually, and not 2 years, which was the prognosis given to him, he had 11 Ozurdex implants in the right eye. Interestingly, he failed triamcinolone trial in both eyes. He failed Iluvien trial just to give it the longevity in the left eye. He had 10 Ozurdex implants. The Ozurdex was the only thing he seemed to be responding for some reason. Obviously, he ended up with cataract surgery in both eyes because Ozurdex causes cataracts. And ocular hypertension almost always is, if you're going to do so many Ozurdexes, you know, you're going to get ocular hypertension. Ongoing treatment for myeloma ended up with this, after 6 years with a vision of 612 and 630, he went on palliative from February 20 and died a few weeks later. So quite an interesting sort of a case from our side, but obviously that's how the game is. So thank you very much, and I think that finishes my talk here. And the key learning points really is to recognize the patterns of macular edema and the responder status. That's really, really important. And there is no definition of a typical responder status. You really have to dig out, because you're basing your treatment response on visual acuity and central subfield thickness. And that's where the problem is. So progression of disease, is it usual for diabetes or is it unusual? So natural history of the condition, with or without treatment, is the key here. So if you really want to be a successful clinician, I think that's a valuable tip to remember. And if in doubt, you know, always ask for help, get a second opinion, do an MDT, or share the case in the MRAP WhatsApp group, and then we can start sort of fighting with each other and sort of, I say, never agree to any diagnosis. Happy for any questions or any comments, and if somebody's interested in getting in touch with me, so I'm quite happy to do that. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's great. Thank you very much. Really lovely cases with multimodal imaging. A lot of learning for me. I'm sure other people have picked up some points. Thank you very much. I think the time is up. There's a Central Council meeting, so we'll see you all later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahman.